By spring you'll birth me 3 sons, a virgin mountain man declared to an Amish obese woman on a freezing Colorado night. He was a giant who had never known love. She was cast out, called barren, left to die in the snow. When he brought her to his lonely cabin, he made a vow no one could believe. By spring you'll birth me 3 sons. But just as hope sparked between them, the impossible happened. 3 starving half-Apache boys stumbled from the storm, desperate for shelter. With love and faith holding them together, danger thundered at their door, a railroad agent and a deputy demanding the boys be torn away. Now the cabin becomes a battlefield, not of guns, but of hearts, oaths, and courage. Will a woman the world called barren prove stronger than the law? And will a lonely mountain man's foolish prophecy come true, or break the only family he's ever known? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The bitter mountain wind rattled the cabin's shutters as Daniel stirred the pot of venison stew hanging over the hearth. His massive frame cast long shadows in the flickering lamplight. Every few moments, his eyes darted to Miriam, who sat huddled near the fire, her plain black dress still dusted with snow. The spoon trembled in his rough hands as he ladled the steaming stew into 2 wooden bowls. He'd shared this cabin with no one in all his years of trapping, and now here sat this woman, an Amish woman no less, looking like a frightened deer ready to bolt. "It ain't fancy," Daniel muttered, extending a bowl toward her, "but it'll warm you up proper." Miriam accepted the bowl with shaking fingers, her eyes downcast. "Danke, thank you," she whispered, quickly correcting herself from Pennsylvania Dutch to English. The savory aroma of the stew brought color back to her wind-chapped cheeks. Daniel settled his bulk onto a crude wooden stool across from her, the furniture creaking under his weight. The only sounds were the howling wind, the crack and pop of burning logs, and the quiet clinking of spoons against bowls. He watched as Miriam bowed her head in silent prayer before taking her first bite. Her modest prayer cap was askew, and wisps of dark hair had escaped to frame her face. Despite her size, there was a delicate grace to her movements that made his heart ache. "Your family," Daniel started, then faltered when she flinched at the word. He pressed on, his voice gentle despite its deep rumble. "They had no right to leave you out here. No right at all." Miriam's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. A tear rolled down her cheek, landing with a soft plop in her stew. They said I was a burden, too heavy to be useful. No man would want." Her voice cracked. "And barren besides. What good is a woman who can't bear children?" Daniel's hands clenched around his bowl. The words he'd blurted out by the creek echoed in his mind. "By spring you'll birth me 3 sons." What madness had possessed him to make such a wild declaration? He'd never even courted a woman before, let alone made such bold predictions about children. "Miss Yoder," he said carefully, "about what I said earlier." "You didn't mean it," she interrupted, her voice small but resigned. "Of course you didn't. No one would want—" "No!" The force of his response made her jump. Daniel moderated his tone. "I mean, I did mean it, sort of. Not exactly like that, perhaps." He ran a hand through his thick beard in frustration. "I'm not good with words, Miss Yoder, never have been. But I know what it's like to be judged for size, to be called names and cast aside." Miriam looked up then, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were red-rimmed but keen as they took in his enormous frame, the way he hunched as if trying to appear smaller. "They called me bear, giant brute," Daniel continued softly. "Said I was too big, too rough for polite company. Scared folks just by walking into a room. So I came up here where size is useful against the mountains and the cold." He gestured to the cabin around them. "Built all this myself, but being alone—" He swallowed hard. "Being alone ain't no way to live." The wind shrieked outside, making the windows rattle. Miriam pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Why did you say that thing about sons?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel set his bowl aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I had a dream. 3 nights passed. Saw 3 boys running through these mountains, strong and sure as young elk. Didn't understand it then." He met her eyes. "But when I found you by that creek today, something inside me knew. Those boys need a mother with a gentle heart and strong faith. They need you." Miriam's hand flew to her throat. "But I can't," the doctor said. "Doctors ain't always right," Daniel said firmly. "And even if they are, there's more than one way to make a family. Plenty of orphans need homes in these parts." Fresh tears spilled down Miriam's cheeks, but these seemed different from her earlier ones. "You're serious," she breathed. "You truly mean this?" Daniel nodded, his own eyes growing moist. "I know it's sudden-like. No, we're strangers yet. But I'm offering you a home here, Miss Yoder. A real home, not just shelter from the storm. We can take it slow, court proper as you see fit." He gestured to the spare room off the main cabin. "That room's yours, with a good strong lock. I'll sleep out here by the fire." Miriam's hands trembled as she set her bowl aside. She clasped them in her lap, studying them intently. "My community, they had their reasons for casting me out. I'm not..." She struggled with the words. "I'm not what most men would want in a wife." "Most men are fools," Daniel said simply. "I don't want most women. I want someone who understands what it means to be different, to be judged. Someone who keeps their faith even when others turn away." He paused, gathering his courage. "I want you, Miss Yoder, if you'll have me." The firelight caught the tears on Miriam's cheeks, making them glitter like morning dew. "I don't know you," she said softly. "And you don't know me." "That's true enough," Daniel agreed. "But I reckon we've got all winter to learn each other proper. No rushing, no pressure. Just two lonely souls seeing if maybe God had a plan when he brought us together in a snowstorm." Miriam closed her eyes, her lips moving in silent prayer. When she opened them again, there was a glimmer of hope in their depths. "I accept your offer of shelter, Mr. Boone. And..." She took a deep breath. "And I'm willing to see what God has planned if you are." Daniel's heart swelled so full he thought it might burst. "Then welcome home, Miss Yoder," he said softly. "Welcome home." The wind continued to howl outside, but inside the cabin something warm and tender had taken root. Like a seed planted in winter soil, it would need time and care to grow. But as Daniel showed Miriam to her room, both felt the first stirrings of possibility, of a future neither had dared to dream of just hours before. The prophecy of 3 sons hung in the air between them, not as a burden but as a promise. Whether by birth or by choosing, spring would bring new life to these mountains. For now, though, they had a warm fire, hot stew, and the beginning of understanding between 2 souls who had found each other in the wildness of a Colorado winter. Morning crept over the Colorado mountains with a vengeance. The storm that had threatened the previous night now unleashed its full fury, hurling snow against the cabin walls with savage force. Miriam woke to the sound of wind whistling through the smallest gaps in the logs, creating an eerie melody that made her shiver despite the warmth of her borrowed quilts. She lay still for a moment, orienting herself in the unfamiliar room. The events of yesterday seemed almost dreamlike. Her family's abandonment, the strange mountain man's prophecy, this unexpected shelter. But the solid walls around her and the faint smell of wood smoke confirmed it was all real. Through the door, she heard Daniel moving about in the main room, his heavy footsteps accompanied by the clatter of firewood being stacked. Miriam smoothed her hair beneath her prayer cap and straightened her wrinkled dress as best she could. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Daniel stood by the hearth, his massive frame silhouetted against the growing flames. He turned at the sound of her door, offering a slight nod. "Storm's blown in proper now," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Might be stuck here a few days." Miriam clasped her hands together. "Then I should make myself useful." She moved toward the fire, noting how the flames had dwindled overnight. "May I help tend the fire?" Daniel stepped back, giving her space. "Much obliged. Been managing alone so long I reckon I've forgotten proper ways." Together they built up the fire, Miriam arranging smaller kindling while Daniel added larger logs. The familiar task helped ease some of the awkwardness between them. When warmth once again filled the cabin, Miriam looked around with fresh eyes. The cabin's interior spoke of solitude and functionality. One narrow bed stood against the far wall, its frame hand-hewn from local timber. A simple table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, while rough shelves held basic provisions. What caught her attention, however, was a well-worn Bible resting on a small shelf near the bed. "You read scripture?" she asked softly. Daniel nodded, running a calloused hand over the Bible's leather cover. Every morning and night. Ain't much for church going up here, but the good book keeps me company. Miriam felt something ease in her chest. Whatever else this strange situation might be, at least they shared this foundation of faith. I should see about breakfast, she said, moving toward the kitchen area. She found basic supplies: cornmeal, dried meat, some preserved fruits. Soon the cabin filled with the smell of cooking. They ate in relative silence, the storm's fury providing background noise. Miriam could feel questions building between them, heavy as the snow piling against the windows. Finally, she gathered her courage. "Mr. Boone," she began, her fingers twisting in her apron. "About what you said yesterday, about sons." She swallowed hard. "There's something you should know." Daniel set down his spoon, giving her his full attention. His quiet patience gave her strength to continue. "The elders, my community, they didn't cast me out just because of my size." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she forced herself to continue. "The doctors say I'm barren. No chance of children. Ever." The words felt like stones in her mouth, each one heavy with years of shame. Daniel remained silent for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "If God wills, he'll send sons, by blood or by providence." Miriam's head snapped up, startled by both his words and the quiet certainty behind them. "You still believe that? Even knowing?" "The Lord works in mysterious ways, Miss Yoder. Seen it myself out here in the wilderness. Sometimes what looks like the end of hope is just the beginning of something we ain't expected." His blunt mercy struck her like a physical blow. How long had she carried the weight of her perceived failure? How many nights had she prayed for understanding? Yet here was this mountain man, this stranger, accepting what her own people could not. The day passed slowly, marked by domestic tasks that needed doing despite the storm. Miriam found comfort in the familiar motions of housework, though the cabin's sparse furnishings were a far cry from her former home. By evening, sleet had replaced the snow, drumming against the roof like thrown pebbles. Miriam stood at the crude kitchen table, kneading dough with practiced movements. The familiar task soothed her nerves, giving her hands something useful to do while her mind processed the strange turns her life had taken. Across the room, Daniel sat on a low stool, bent over a pair of snowshoes that needed mending. The firelight caught the silver threads in his beard as he worked, his large hands surprisingly deft with the delicate task. "May I ask you something?" Miriam ventured, pressing her palms into the dough. Daniel glanced up, nodding. "Why have you never married?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider its boldness. "Forgive me. That's too personal." But Daniel shook his head, though his cheeks reddened visibly beneath his beard. "It's a fair question, given circumstances." He set aside the snowshoe, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Truth is, I've never known a woman, not in any way that matters." His admission hung in the air between them. Miriam's hands stilled in the dough as understanding dawned. "Folk in town," he continued, his voice low. "They see my size and assume things. Figure I must be dangerous, wild-like. Ladies cross the street when I pass, so I stayed to myself, came up here where the mountains don't judge a man by his shape or his awkward ways." Miriam resumed kneading, but slower now, thoughtful. "I understand," she said softly. "Being judged by how the Lord made you. Being found wanting." Their eyes met briefly across the room before both looked away, the moment too raw, too honest for sustained contact. "Reckon we ought to pray," Daniel said after a while, setting aside his mending. "Been my habit, reading scripture before bed." Miriam wiped her hands on her apron. "I would like that." They sat at the table, the Bible between them. Daniel's thick fingers carefully turned the pages to Psalms, and he began to read in his deep, rough voice. The familiar words washed over them both, bringing comfort in their ancient promises. When he finished reading, they bowed their heads together. Their prayer was silent, each lost in their own conversation with God, yet somehow the shared moment felt intimate in a way that made Miriam's heart flutter. The storm continued its assault on the cabin, but inside something gentle was taking root. Not love, not yet, but perhaps understanding, perhaps hope. "Good night, Mr. Boone," Miriam said softly, rising from the table. "Good night, Miss Yoder," he replied, his voice equally soft. "Sleep well." As Miriam closed her bedroom door, she heard Daniel adding wood to the fire, preparing for his night on the floor. She thought about his prophecy, about his easy acceptance of her barrenness, about the gentle way he handled his Bible despite his enormous hands. The man was a mystery, but perhaps one worth taking time to understand. In the main room, Daniel wrapped himself in blankets near the hearth, listening to the storm rage outside. He thought about Miriam's courage in sharing her shame, about the quiet strength in her hands as she worked the dough, about the way her eyes shone when he read from Scripture. The situation was far from conventional, but something in his heart told him it was right. The sleet continued to lash the roof, but neither of them felt quite so alone anymore. The next 3 days passed in a slow dance of domesticity and silence, punctuated by the constant howl of winter wind. Snow continued to pile against the cabin walls, transforming the world outside into a blank white canvas. Inside, however, life found its own gentle rhythm. Miriam discovered purpose in the simple tasks before her. The cabin, while sturdy, showed clear signs of bachelor living. Mending lay forgotten in corners, dust gathered on windowsills, and Daniel's few possessions lay scattered without proper homes. Her hands itched to bring order to the chaos. On the morning of the second day, she gathered Daniel's shirts into a neat pile, noting the worn edges and frayed seams. "These need attention," she said, holding up a particularly threadbare sleeve. Daniel looked up from where he sat cleaning his rifle, his cheeks coloring slightly. "Been meaning to get to those," he mumbled. "I can help," Miriam offered, already threading a needle. "If you don't mind?" He nodded, watching as she settled into the chair by the window, where weak winter light provided the best illumination for sewing. Her capable fingers moved swiftly, patching and mending with practiced ease. The quiet industry of her work filled the cabin with a homey feeling he'd never known before. While Miriam sewed, Daniel kept busy with the endless tasks winter demanded. He split logs outside, the sharp crack of his axe echoing through the frozen air. When the cold drove him back inside, he worked on his traps, testing springs and replacing worn parts. The familiar tasks helped settle his nerves, still jumpy from the strangeness of sharing his space after so many years alone. Miriam began humming as she worked, old hymns that seemed to rise unbidden from her memory. The gentle melodies filled the cabin's corners, softening its rough edges. Sometimes she caught herself and stopped, embarrassed, but Daniel never complained. In truth, he found himself straining to hear the quiet tunes, though he'd never admit it. She discovered a satisfaction in bringing order to the cabin. Shelves were reorganized, surfaces dusted, and supplies properly stored. Each small improvement felt like laying claim to the space, though she tried not to dwell on what that might mean. On the evening of the third day, as they sat before the fire sharing a simple supper, Miriam finally gathered her courage. The question had been burning in her mind since that first strange encounter by the creek. "Mr. Boone," she began, her fingers twisting in her apron. "About what you said that first day." She swallowed hard. "About the 3 sons. Did you mean it?" Daniel set down his plate, his expression solemn in the firelight. For a long moment he said nothing, and Miriam's heart squeezed painfully in her chest. Then he spoke, his voice low but clear. "I meant every word." Miriam felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of fear and something warmer flooding through her. In all her 26 years, no one had ever spoken of a future with her. The doctor's pronouncement of her barrenness had seemed to close that door forever. Yet here sat this strange mountain man, calmly declaring what seemed impossible. "But how can you be so sure?" she whispered. Daniel's large hands wrapped around his cup, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Can't explain it proper, just know it's true, same as I know spring follows winter." His simple faith struck her deeply. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Finally, Miriam rose and began mixing cornbread batter. The familiar motions helped steady her hands, still trembling from their exchange. When the bread was done, golden brown and fragrant, they shared it without speaking. Something had shifted between them, a fragile trust, delicate as frost patterns on a window pane. Neither dared disturb it with too many words. That night, Miriam lay awake in the small bedroom, listening to Daniel's steady breathing from his place near the hearth. His words echoed in her mind. I meant every word. Sleep came slowly, wrapped in thoughts of impossible promises and the strange warmth of hope. Before dawn on the fourth day, the storm finally broke. Stars still glittered in the dark sky when Daniel rose, pulling on his heavy coat and gathering his traps. The snow had drifted deep, but the air held that particular stillness that meant the weather had turned. Need to check my trap lines, he told Miriam over a hasty breakfast of cornmeal mush. Won't be gone long. She nodded, already moving through her morning tasks. The routine felt comfortable now, as if she'd been doing this for years instead of days. Daniel stepped out into the pristine morning, his snowshoes leaving clean tracks in the fresh powder. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky when he finished setting his first few traps. As he moved through the familiar circuit, something caught his eye, a slight disturbance in the snow's perfect surface. He knelt down, his heart suddenly beating faster. There, barely visible in the new snow, were footprints. Small ones, definitely human. Too small for an adult, but clear enough to be recent. They wandered erratically as if their maker had been confused or lost. Concern gripped him. In these mountains, winter showed no mercy to the unprepared. He'd heard too many tales of travelers caught in storms, of children wandered too far from home. Without shelter, they wouldn't last long in these temperatures. Abandoning his remaining traps, Daniel hurried back to the cabin. He found Miriam at the stove, stirring a pot of beans. There's tracks out there, he said without preamble. Small ones, like children's. Miriam's hand flew to her throat, clutching her shawl. Children? Out in this weather? Her face paled as she added, I've heard stories. About winters past. About wanderers who couldn't find shelter. Daniel was already checking his rifle, making sure it was loaded. He didn't expect trouble, but in the mountains it was better to be prepared. I need to follow those tracks. See where they lead. Be careful, Miriam said softly, watching as he pulled on his heavy coat once more. God be with you. Daniel nodded, shouldering his rifle. The morning had grown brighter, sunlight glinting off the endless white landscape. He paused at the door, looking back at Miriam. She stood in the cabin's warm glow, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. The sight struck him suddenly. How right she looked there, as if she'd always belonged. Then he stepped out into the cold, his heart pounding with more than just exertion as he followed the mysterious tracks into the silent woods. The small footprints led away from the cabin, weaving between the towering pines. Daniel moved carefully, his experienced eyes reading the story written in the snow. Whoever had made these tracks had passed through recently, probably during the night when the storm finally broke. They showed signs of exhaustion, places where the walker had stumbled or sat in the snow to rest. With growing urgency, he pressed forward into the forest, following those telling marks in the pristine white surface. The sun climbed higher in the sky behind him, and somewhere in the distance, a crow called out its harsh warning. Daniel moved cautiously through the snow-laden forest, following the meandering trail of small footprints. The morning sun filtered through frost-covered pine boughs, casting diamond-like sparkles across the pristine white landscape. His breaths came out in visible puffs as he pressed forward, concern growing with each passing minute. The tracks wandered erratically between the trees, sometimes crossing their own path, telling a story of confusion and exhaustion. Here and there, he found deeper impressions where someone had fallen or stopped to rest. His experienced eyes noted how the spacing between steps grew shorter, suggesting whoever made them was struggling to keep moving. A crow's harsh call echoed through the silent woods, making Daniel pause. He scanned the area carefully, his hunter's instincts alert for any sign of movement. The tracks led toward a small clearing where a massive pine had fallen, its upturned roots creating a natural shelter. As he approached the fallen tree, a soft whimper reached his ears. Daniel moved closer, his heart pounding. There, huddled beneath the snow-covered root ball, he found 3 small figures pressed together for warmth. Their clothes were thin and torn, their dark hair dusted with snow. They were children, 3 boys by the look of them, their faces showing clear signs of their mixed Apache heritage. The youngest couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He lay curled against the chest of an older boy, perhaps 12, while a third child of middle age shivered violently between them. All three were barely conscious, their lips tinged blue from the cold. "Dear Lord," Daniel breathed, immediately shrugging off his heavy coat. He wrapped it around the smallest boy, who stirred weakly at his touch. The oldest child's eyes fluttered open, showing a flash of fear before exhaustion dragged them closed again. "I'm here to help," Daniel said softly, gathering the littlest one into his arms. The child felt as light as a winter sparrow, his small body trembling uncontrollably. "Can you walk?" he asked the other two boys. "My cabin's not far. There's food and warmth there." The middle boy nodded weakly while the oldest struggled to his feet, keeping a protective hand on his brother's shoulder. Daniel could see the effort it took them to stay upright, their legs shaking with cold and fatigue. "Follow me," he said, adjusting his grip on the youngest. "Stay close now. We'll get you warm soon enough." The trek back to the cabin seemed to take hours, though Daniel knew it couldn't have been more than 20 minutes. He set a slow pace, constantly looking back to make sure the other two boys were still following. Their progress was painfully slow but steady. The older boys supported each other, stumbling through the deep snow in Daniel's tracks. Finally, the cabin came into view, smoke rising straight and strong from its chimney. Daniel's heart lifted at the sight. "Almost there," he encouraged the boys, who looked ready to collapse. He didn't bother knocking, just pushed the door open with his shoulder. Warm air and the smell of cooking beans washed over them as they entered. Miriam stood by the stove, her eyes widening as Daniel stepped inside with his burden. Her hand flew to her mouth when she saw the three half-frozen children. Oh, merciful heaven. She sprang into action immediately, maternal instincts overriding any hesitation. "Bring them close to the fire," she directed, already pulling blankets from the shelf. "I'll heat some broth." Daniel settled the youngest boy in the chair nearest the hearth while the other two sank to the floor, exhausted. Miriam wrapped blankets around their shoulders, her movements gentle but efficient. The smallest child reached for her automatically, seeking comfort, and she gathered him close without thinking. "There now, little one," she soothed, stroking his dark hair back from his forehead. "You're safe here. We'll get you warm and fed." The boy pressed his face against her shoulder, his small body still shaking. Something shifted in Miriam's heart at that moment, a warmth she'd never expected to feel. Maternal instincts she'd thought forever denied to her awakening with surprising strength. She bustled to the stove, keeping the little one in her arms as she ladled hot broth into tin cups. Daniel helped the other boys hold the cups steady as they drank, their hands too numb to grip properly. The warm liquid seemed to revive them somewhat, bringing color back to their cheeks. "Can you tell us your names?" Miriam asked softly, settling back in her chair with the youngest still curled against her. The oldest boy swallowed hard, glancing at his brothers before answering. "I'm Isaac," he said in a quiet voice. "That's Caleb," he nodded to the middle brother. "And little Eli." The youngest stirred at his name but didn't lift his head from Miriam's shoulder. "Your parents?" Daniel asked gently, though he feared he knew the answer from their condition. Isaac's face tightened with grief. "Papa died in the logging camp 2 months past. Mama..." He trailed off, looking down at his cup. "She ran," Caleb spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. "When the soldiers came, told us to hide in the rocks, said she'd lead them away, then come back." He wrapped his arms around himself, the blanket sliding off one shoulder until Miriam reached over to adjust it. She never came back. Miriam's arms tightened around little Eli, her heart aching for these lost children. "How long have you been wandering?" "Many days," Isaac answered. "We were trying to reach the mission station, but the storm..." He shook his head, unable to continue. "You're safe now," Daniel said firmly, adding more wood to the fire. "That's what matters." Miriam was already moving again, still carrying Eli as she gathered bread and dried meat. The boys ate ravenously, though their eyes remained wide with fear and exhaustion. She watched them, noting how the older two made sure their little brother ate first, protecting him even in this safe space. As she tended to the children, a realization slowly dawned on her. She looked up to find Daniel watching her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief that surely matched her own. His words from their first meeting echoed in her mind. "By spring you'll birth me 3 sons." Here they were, 3 sons not of her body but delivered to her care by Providence. The weight of it made her hands tremble as she stroked Eli's hair. The little boy had fallen asleep against her chest, his breathing finally steady and warm. Daniel moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. "You see?" he whispered, so softly only she could hear. "God works in ways we can't reckon." Miriam nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She looked at the three boys, Isaac watching them warily from beneath heavy eyelids, Caleb already dozing with his head on his older brother's shoulder, and little Eli sleeping trustingly in her arms. Her heart felt full to bursting with an emotion she'd never dared to hope for, the fierce, protective love of a mother. The morning light streamed through the cabin's windows, turning the floating dust motes to gold. Outside, the world remained white and frozen, but inside, something new had taken root. A family, growing from the seeds of prophecy and providence, warming the space that had once held only loneliness and doubt. Dawn painted the Colorado mountains in soft pink hues as life stirred within Daniel's once lonely cabin. The cramped space, usually silent save for the crackle of the hearth, now buzzed with the energy of 3 young boys and 2 adults finding their way through their first morning together. Daniel stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking most of the morning light as he demonstrated the proper way to hold an axe. Isaac watched intently, his dark eyes studying every movement of Daniel's hands on the wooden handle. The boy's expression remained guarded, but there was an eagerness in the way he leaned forward, drinking in the instruction. "Like this?" Isaac asked, mimicking Daniel's grip on the smaller axe they'd found for him. "That's right," Daniel nodded, his voice gentle despite its deep rumble. "Keep your back straight now, and let the weight of the axe head do the work." Behind them, Caleb bounced on his toes, practically vibrating with the need to try it himself. "Can I have a turn? I'm strong too." "Patience, boy," Daniel said, but his stern tone was softened by the slight smile tugging at his lips. "First watch your brother. Learn from his example." Inside the cabin, Miriam moved about the kitchen area, her skirts swishing against the rough-hewn floorboards. Little Eli followed her every step, one hand firmly gripping her dress, the other clutching a wooden spoon she'd given him to hold. His wide eyes tracked her movements as she added vegetables to the large iron pot hanging over the hearth. "Would you like to help me stir, little one?" Miriam asked, her heart warming when Eli nodded eagerly. She lifted him carefully, settling him on her hip so he could reach the pot. Together they stirred the stew, steam rising around their faces as Eli concentrated on his important task. Through the window, the sound of splitting wood rang out, followed by Caleb's excited whoop. "Did you see? Isaac split it clean through." "Well done," Daniel's praise carried clearly, making Isaac stand a little straighter. "Now, show your brother how to gather the kindling safely." Miriam watched the scene unfold, her chest tight with emotion. Just yesterday, these boys had been near death in the snow. Now they were bringing life and purpose to this humble cabin. She looked down at Eli, still focused on stirring, and pressed a gentle kiss to his dark hair. The day passed in a blur of activity. Isaac proved to be a quick study with the axe, while Caleb's enthusiasm made up for his less precise strikes. Daniel showed infinite patience with both boys, his usual awkwardness forgotten in the focus of teaching. Even little Eli ventured outside briefly, though he scurried back to Miriam's side when a jay's harsh cry startled him. As dusk approached, Miriam added more vegetables to the stew pot, unconsciously making a larger portion than she ever had before. Her mind was already racing ahead to tomorrow's meals, calculating how to stretch their supplies to feed 3 growing boys. The familiar weight of Eli against her skirts brought comfort rather than burden. The cabin grew darker as the sun dipped behind the mountains. Daniel lit the oil lamp while Miriam laid out tin plates and cups. The boys, exhausted from their day's work, sat around the rough-hewn table, the lamplight catching the uncertainty in their faces. Daniel cleared his throat, his hands clasped awkwardly in front of him. That is, we ought to." He looked helplessly at Miriam. "Before we eat, we should give thanks." Understanding softened Miriam's features. She closed her eyes and began to sing in a clear, sweet voice. "Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise him all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly host. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost." The simple hymn filled the cabin with warmth. When Miriam opened her eyes, she saw the tension had eased from the boy's shoulders. Even Isaac's watchful expression had softened, though he quickly looked down at his plate when he caught her watching. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the clink of spoons against tin and the occasional murmur of appreciation for the hearty stew. Miriam noticed how the older boys made sure Eli had enough, the same protective instinct she'd seen yesterday still strong in them. After the meal, Daniel showed the boys how to arrange their bedrolls near the hearth. They had no proper beds yet, but the floor was warm, and Miriam had found extra blankets in Daniel's storage chest. The boys lay down close together, their usual pattern of Isaac on one side, Caleb in the middle, and little Eli curled up nearest the fire. Miriam moved quietly among them, tucking blankets more securely around small shoulders. When she reached Eli, he caught her hand before she could pull away. "Stay," he whispered, his eyes already heavy with sleep. "I'm right here," she assured him, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. "Sleep now, little one." She sat beside him until his breathing evened out, then carefully stood and made her way to where Daniel waited by the window. The mountain man's massive silhouette was outlined against the star-filled sky beyond the glass. "I never thought to see such a sight in my home," Daniel said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Reckoned I'd die alone up here. Nothing but pelts and silence for company." He turned to look at Miriam, his eyes shining in the dim light. "Now I see God's hand in all of it, in finding you, in your staying, in leading these boys to us." Miriam pressed her hands to her mouth, fighting back tears. All her life she'd been told she wasn't enough. Not good enough, not thin enough, not fertile enough. But here, in this moment, she felt chosen. God had led her to this place, to these children who needed the love stored up in her heart. She moved to adjust Eli's blanket one more time, her touch gentle so as not to wake him. Looking at the sleeping boys, Isaac's protective arm thrown over his brother's even in sleep, Caleb's fingers curled around the edge of his blanket, Eli's peaceful face, she knew with sudden clarity, she wanted this family to last. This wasn't just shelter from a storm or temporary refuge. This was the answer to prayers she hadn't dared to speak aloud. These boys needed a mother's love, and she had so much love to give. Daniel needed a family to share his solitude, and she needed a place to belong. "Your prophecy," she whispered, turning back to Daniel. "3 sons by spring. When you said those words, I thought you were touched by snow madness. But now we see his plan was bigger than our understanding," Daniel finished, his voice full of wonder. "These boys need us, Miriam. And maybe we needed them just as much." They stood together in the quiet cabin, watching over their sleeping charges. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, and somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf called to its pack. But inside, the warmth of family, unexpected, unplanned, but undeniably right, filled every corner of the humble space. The week after the boys' arrival brought new rhythms to the cabin. Dawn found Daniel and Isaac checking trap lines, their boots crunching through fresh snow. Daniel showed the boy how to read animal tracks, explaining which prints meant food and which spelled danger. "See here?" Daniel pointed to delicate marks in the powder. "Rabbit passed through not long ago, but look there." He indicated deeper gouges nearby. "Mountain lion's been tracking it. We'll set our traps elsewhere." Isaac absorbed every word, his dark eyes sharp and attentive. He moved with natural stealth, already showing the tracking skills passed down from his Apache mother. When they found an untouched area rich with rabbit signs, Daniel demonstrated how to set a snare. "Gentle now," he instructed, guiding Isaac's smaller hands. "Too tight and the wire might snap. Too loose, and our dinner slips away." Back at the cabin, Caleb watched eagerly as Daniel split logs for the ever-hungry fireplace. The boy bounced on his toes, impatient to try. Daniel finally relented, showing him how to stand and grip the smaller axe he'd found in his tool shed. "Plant your feet wide," Daniel directed, adjusting Caleb's stance. "Keep your back straight. Let the weight of the axe do the work." He helped guide the boys' first few swings, making sure the blade struck true. Inside, Miriam sat by the window with her sewing basket, watching them while her needle flashed in and out of fabric. She'd already taken apart one of her plain dresses, using the sturdy cloth to patch the boys' threadbare shirts. Little Eli sat at her feet, carefully sorting buttons she'd given him into neat piles. "See how your brothers learn?" she said softly to Eli. "Soon you'll be big enough too." The young boy nodded solemnly, though he seemed content to stay close to her skirts. Each evening after the day's work was done, Miriam gathered the boys around the table. She'd found Daniel's old Bible, its pages well worn but clean. Her clear voice carried through the cabin as she read familiar verses, helping the boys sound out words they didn't know. "The Lord is my shepherd," they repeated after her. "I shall not want." But want they did, as the week wore on. The pantry grew leaner, despite Daniel's careful rationing. He counted their supplies one morning, his brow furrowed with concern. They had enough dried meat and beans to last perhaps another week, but growing boys needed more. "We'll need to make for the trading post," he told Miriam quietly while the younger boys slept. "It's a fair distance, but we can't wait much longer." "How far?" Miriam asked, worry creasing her forehead. 2 days there and back if the weather holds." Daniel glanced at Isaac, who was already awake and listening. "I'll take Isaac with me. He's strong enough for the journey, and I could use the help carrying supplies." The next morning, Daniel and Isaac prepared for the trek. Miriam had mended their warmest clothes and packed what little food they could spare. She helped Daniel strap on his snowshoes while Isaac waited impatiently by the door. "We'll be back before you know it," Daniel assured her, seeing the concern in her eyes. "Keep the boys close, and the fire burning." Miriam nodded, drawing Isaac into a quick embrace before he could dodge away. "Be careful," she whispered. "Mind what Daniel tells you." The journey was hard going. Deep snow made every step a challenge, even with snowshoes. Isaac proved his worth, though, never complaining as they pushed through drifts and crossed frozen streams. They made camp the first night in a shallow cave, sharing jerky and stories under the stars. The trading post appeared late the next morning, a cluster of log buildings marking the edge of civilization. Daniel felt Isaac tense beside him as they approached. More people milled about than he'd expected, trappers, miners, and townsmen gathering supplies. Inside the post, Daniel traded his furs for flour, coffee, and other necessities. Isaac helped him choose sturdy fabric for Miriam to sew with, his fingers running over the different textures with curiosity. But their peaceful errands soured when voices carried from near the door. "Ain't natural," a man muttered loudly enough to be heard. "Mountain man bringing in half-breeds like they're his own." "Probably stole him from some tribe," another added with a harsh laugh, "or found him running wild." Daniel's massive frame stiffened. He felt Isaac go still beside him, the boy's face carefully blank, but his eyes burning with hurt and anger. Daniel's first instinct was to confront the men, to let his fists answer their cruel words. But Isaac's presence stayed him. Violence would only prove their prejudice right. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on Isaac's shoulder. "Help me with these packages, son," he said clearly, emphasizing the last word. "Your mother will be wanting that fabric for your brother's shirts." The deliberate claim of family silenced the muttering. Daniel and Isaac finished their trading and left, heads high, though Daniel's heart ached at the hatred they'd encountered. Back at the cabin, Miriam had kept fear at bay through work and prayer. She taught Caleb and Eli to card wool while singing hymns she remembered from childhood. The familiar melodies filled the lonely spaces, keeping dark thoughts at bay. Together, they recited psalms she'd helped them memorize, finding comfort in the ancient words. When heavy steps finally crunched outside, Miriam rushed to throw open the door. Daniel and Isaac trudged in, snow-covered but safe, their packs bulging with supplies. The younger boys swarmed their brother while Miriam helped Daniel shed his frozen outer layers. That night, after the children slept, Miriam sat with Daniel by the fire. The flames painted shadows on the cabin walls as she worked the new fabric with her needle. "I feel safe here," she confessed quietly, her eyes on her stitching. "Safer than I've felt in years, even with the winter and the wild all around us." She glanced at the sleeping boys. "God has given us a precious gift in these children." Daniel watched her steady hands create order from chaos, just as she'd brought warmth to his cold home. "He sent me something even more precious," he whispered. "He sent you here, Miriam. When I was most alone, he led you to my door." Miriam's needle paused. She looked up at Daniel, seeing in his face the same wonder she felt at how their broken pieces had somehow formed a family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in the quiet of their cabin, they were whole. The fire crackled softly, and outside, snow began to fall again. But inside, Warmth and love filled every corner of the small space where 4 lost souls had found their home. A warm wind swept down from the mountains, carrying the first whispers of change. The hard-packed snow began to soften, creating tiny rivulets that trickled between ice patches. Daniel stood on his cabin's porch at dawn, testing the air with the wisdom of long mountain winters. "Might be our chance," he said to Miriam as she joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter against the morning chill. "Won't last more than a day or two, but we'd best make use of it." Inside, the boys were already awake, drawn by the sounds of dripping snow and the promise of activity after days of confinement. Isaac helped Eli pull on his boots, while Caleb bounced impatiently by the door, eager to be useful. "First thing's water," Daniel announced, gathering empty buckets. "Stream will be running clearer now, and we need to fill every barrel we can before the next freeze." They formed a line from the creek to the cabin, passing buckets hand to hand. Even little Eli joined in, determined to carry his share despite spilling half his water along the way. Miriam couldn't help but smile at his serious expression as he carefully placed his feet in the bigger boy's footprints. "That's it, steady now," she encouraged, steadying his bucket when it threatened to overtip. The boy beamed at her praise, straightening his shoulders with pride. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow into thick slush that soaked their boots. Daniel showed Isaac and Caleb how to stack firewood properly against the cabin wall, creating a sturdy pile that would keep the wood dry when snow returned. "Higher than my head?" Caleb asked, straining to lift a heavy log. "Higher than mine," Daniel answered, taking the weight before it could fall. "Winter's got a long way to go yet." Miriam worked alongside them, her strong arms carrying loads that made Daniel raise his eyebrows in appreciation. She had spent years proving her worth through hard work, and here, finally, her strength was seen as a blessing rather than a burden. By midday, the cabin's water barrels were full, and the impressive stack of firewood reached nearly to the eaves. Daniel turned his attention to the roof, where melting snow had revealed a few spots where the timber had warped. "Need to fix those before the next storm," he muttered, hauling tools up the ladder. Isaac scrambled up behind him, nimble as a mountain goat, while Caleb handed up supplies from below. Miriam kept one eye on their work while preparing a hearty lunch of bean soup and cornbread. Her heart clenched every time one of them moved near the roof's edge, but she forced herself to stay calm. These were mountain boys now. They needed to learn. The afternoon passed in steady work. Daniel showed the older boys how to split shingles and patch holes, his large hands gentle as he guided their smaller ones. Miriam sorted through their supplies, preserving what could be saved and mending what was torn. Eli helped in his own way, singing songs he'd learned from his mother while sorting buttons and strips of fabric. As dusk approached, the temperature began to drop again. Daniel hurried to finish the last repairs while Miriam called everyone inside. The cabin filled with the warm scent of cooking and the sound of boots being kicked free of snow. After supper, they gathered around the fire as had become their custom. Daniel read from his Bible while Miriam sewed by lamplight. The boys sprawled on the floor, drawing pictures in the hearth ash with sticks until Miriam gently shooed them away from the soot. It was then that Caleb looked up at her, his young face suddenly serious in the firelight. "Miss Miriam?" he asked, voice small but clear. "Yes, child? Are you—" He paused, fingers twisting in his shirt. "Are you going to leave us too? Like our mother did?" The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Isaac stiffened, his face carefully blank, while little Eli crawled closer to Miriam's skirts. Daniel set down his Bible, watching intently. Miriam's heart ached at the fear in Caleb's voice. She reached out and took his hand in hers, her work-roughened fingers engulfing his smaller ones. "No, Caleb," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" His eyes searched her face, looking for any hint of uncertainty. "I promise." She squeezed his hand gently. "God brought us together for a reason. This is where I belong now, right here, with you and your brothers and Daniel." Caleb's shoulders relaxed and he leaned against her knee. Isaac tried to maintain his stoic expression, but Miriam saw the relief in his eyes. Eli had already curled up against her side, his small hand clutching a fold of her dress. They sat like that for a long while, the fire casting warm shadows on their faces. Miriam hummed an old hymn while the boys gradually dozed off, their bodies heavy with the day's work and the comfort of belonging. Daniel watched them, his heart full of something he couldn't quite name. The sight of Miriam with the children pressed close around her stirred feelings he'd never expected to have. This woman, who'd arrived at his door lost and afraid, had transformed his lonely cabin into a true home. Later, after the boys were tucked into their bed of quilts on the floor, Daniel and Miriam sat together by the dying fire. The wind had picked up outside, rattling the newly repaired roof, but inside, all was peaceful. "You're a good mother," Daniel said suddenly, the words coming out gruff with emotion. His cheeks reddened at his own boldness, but he pressed on. "They need that. Need you." Miriam's hands stilled in her lap, and she blinked rapidly against sudden tears. "I never thought," she whispered. "I never thought I'd hear anyone say those words to me." She looked down at her large frame, which had brought her so much shame in the past. My family, my community, they all said I wasn't fit to be a mother, that God had made me barren for a reason. "They were wrong," Daniel said simply. His big hand reached out, hesitated, then covered hers briefly. "God had a bigger plan. He sent you these boys who needed a mother's love, not just a mother's body." Miriam's eyes shone in the firelight as she looked at the sleeping children. Isaac's arm was thrown protectively over his youngest brother, while Caleb had somehow managed to sprawl across both of them. They looked so peaceful, so trusting. The wind gusted harder outside, making the cabin creak, but Miriam felt no fear. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future here, watching the boys grow tall and strong, teaching them to read and pray, helping them become men their mother would be proud of. She could see herself keeping this home, working beside Daniel, building something lasting on this mountainside. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Daniel rose to bank the fire for the night, his movements sure and steady in the familiar space. Miriam picked up her sewing again, her needle catching the last of the firelight as she reinforced a seam in Eli's shirt. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps another storm, more repairs, the constant work of keeping 5 people fed and warm in the mountain winter. But tonight, in this moment, Miriam knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. 2 weeks passed like water flowing downstream, each day bringing new rhythms to the cabin's life. The morning dawned crisp and clear, unusual for the season, when Daniel announced they needed supplies from town. He watched Miriam's face carefully as he spoke, noting how her shoulders tensed at the mention of going among strangers. "The boys can mind themselves for a day," he said, his voice gentle. "Isaac knows how to keep the fire stoked, and there's plenty of food ready." Miriam's fingers worried at her apron strings. "Are you certain you want me to come?" she asked softly. "I could stay here with the children." "Need your help choosing cloth and such," Daniel replied. And he hesitated, then added firmly, "You shouldn't have to hide away." The boys helped ready the wagon, excited by the prospect of treats from town. Little Eli clung to Miriam's skirts until the last moment, his dark eyes wide with worry. "We'll return before sundown," she promised, smoothing his hair. "Be good for your brothers." Isaac stood tall, clearly proud of being trusted with responsibility. "We'll be fine, Miss Miriam. I'll make sure they pray before eating." The journey to town took several hours over rough mountain trails. Miriam sat beside Daniel on the wagon seat, her plain dress and cap marking her former Amish life. She kept her eyes lowered as they passed other travelers, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel noticed her discomfort but didn't know how to ease it. Instead, he spoke quietly about practical things, which supplies they needed, how the boys were growing out of their clothes, what seeds to buy for spring planting. His steady voice helped calm her nerves. The town appeared around a bend in the road, a cluster of wooden buildings with snow-covered roofs, smoke rising from chimneys into the winter sky. Miriam's breath caught as they drew closer. She hadn't been among so many people since her banishment. Daniel helped her down from the wagon, his large hands steady and sure. Together they entered the general store, a bell chiming above the door. The warmth inside carried the scent of coffee, leather, and dried goods. Whispers started almost immediately. Miriam felt the stares like physical things, women pausing in their shopping to watch her move between the shelves, men's eyes following her unusual size. Her cheeks burned with shame as she heard the familiar murmurs, that Amish woman, and the one they cast out, Daniel stayed close, his broad shoulders like a shield. He helped her select cloth for the boys' shirts, boots for their growing feet, and the other supplies they needed. His presence gave her courage to lift her head, to carefully choose what would best serve their household. Then came the moment that changed everything. A well-dressed woman at the counter curled her lip as Miriam approached with her selections. "Well, if it isn't the barren outcast," she said, voice carrying clearly through the store. "Surprising to see you've found someone willing to take you in." The store fell silent. Miriam felt the old shame rising like floodwaters, threatening to drown her. But before it could, Daniel's voice rang out, deep and firm as mountain bedrock. "This is Miriam Boone, my wife." The words landed like thunder in the quiet store. Miriam's heart stuttered in her chest. She felt Daniel move closer, his arm barely brushing hers, as he continued to face down the shocked onlookers. The sneering woman's face flushed red. Other customers quickly found reason to study the merchandise on distant shelves. The storekeeper hurried to wrap their purchases, clearly wanting to avoid any conflict. Miriam stood straighter, feeling an unexpected dignity settle over her like a warm shawl. Daniel's declaration, though untrue, had given her something she'd lost long ago, a place to belong, a name to carry with pride. The rest of their business was conducted in tense silence. Daniel paid for their goods, helped load them in the wagon, and assisted Miriam onto the seat with careful courtesy. Only when they were well out of town did he speak again. "I'm sorry," he said gruffly, eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Shouldn't have spoken false. Just couldn't bear to hear them talk about you that way." Miriam's hand smoothed her skirts, considering her words carefully. "I didn't mind," she admitted finally. "You gave me a name worth carrying, even if it's not truly mine." Daniel's hands tightened on the reins, but he said nothing more. The wagon creaked along the mountain trail, winter sunshine slanting through bare branches above them. Miriam found herself remembering the way he'd said it. Miriam Boone, with such quiet certainty as if it were already true. They reached home just as the sun began to set. The boys tumbled out of the cabin to help unload, chattering about their day, how Isaac had kept everyone fed and warm, how Caleb had taught Eli new words in Apache. Miriam set about making supper, her movements sure and peaceful in the familiar space. She mixed flour and water for bread, humming softly as she worked. The dough felt alive under her hands as she kneaded it, full of possibility. The boys gathered around to watch as she shaped the loaf and set it near the fire to rise. They'd never seen bread made from scratch before, and their fascination made her smile. When the loaf rose beautifully, puffing up golden and proud, they clapped with genuine delight. "You're magic, Miss Miriam," Eli declared while Caleb nodded seriously in agreement. "Not magic," she corrected gently. "Just patience and faith, like most good things in life." As darkness fell outside, the cabin glowed with warmth and light. Daniel sat in his usual chair, mending harness leather while the boys played quiet games on the floor. The lamplight caught Miriam's smile as she moved about her evening tasks, and something in Daniel's chest tightened at the sight. He found himself watching her more and more, the way she tucked stray wisps of hair behind her ear, how her hands moved sure and capable through every task, the gentle way she spoke to the boys. Something was growing in his heart, like Miriam's bread dough rising in the warmth, but he didn't yet have words to name it. The evening passed in comfortable quiet, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the children's soft voices. Miriam's humming blended with these familiar sounds, making the cabin feel more like home than it ever had in all Daniel's solitary years. When she served the fresh bread with their supper, its warm, yeasty scent filling the air, Daniel thought about how she'd looked in town, standing tall beside him, accepting the name he'd given her. He'd spoken without thinking, driven by an instinct to protect, to claim her as family. Now, watching her break bread and share it among them all, he wondered if perhaps his impulsive words had held more truth than he'd known. Fresh snow blanketed the Colorado mountains, piling deeper against the cabin walls with each passing day. The world outside grew quieter, muffled under winter's thick white blanket, but inside Daniel Boone's cabin new life flourished. Miriam sat at the rough-hewn table, a worn Bible open before her. Little Eli perched on her lap while Caleb and Isaac crowded close on either side. The lamplight cast a warm glow over the pages as her finger traced beneath each word. "And God said, Eli sounded out carefully, his small face scrunched in concentration. Very good, Miriam beamed, squeezing him gently. Now the next word? Let. Caleb jumped in, eager to show what he'd learned. Wait your turn, Isaac reminded his brother, though his own eyes sparkled with pride at knowing the words. Across the room, Daniel sat in his chair by the fire, hands busy with knife and wood. He kept his head down, focused on his whittling, but his ears caught every word of the lesson. Something warm spread through his chest at the sound of their voices mixing together. Miriam's patient guidance, the boys' eager attempts, the occasional bursts of laughter when someone stumbled over a particularly difficult word. Shavings fell into neat piles at his feet as 3 small horses took shape under his careful blade. He'd never carved toys before, had never had reason to, but watching the boys play with sticks and pine cones had sparked the idea. Now his large hands, more accustomed to setting traps and skinning game, moved with surprising delicacy over the soft pine wood. What's that word, Miss Miriam? Eli's voice piped up. Sound it out like we practiced, she encouraged. There be light? Wonderful. Miriam's praise filled the cabin like sunshine. You're learning so quickly, all of you. Daniel glanced up to see her hugging Eli close, while the older boys grinned with shared achievement. The sight made his hands pause in their work. He'd lived alone in this cabin for so many years, the silence broken only by wind and wolves. Now it held such different sounds, children's voices, Miriam's gentle instructions, the rustle of Bible pages, and something he'd never expected to hear within these walls, laughter. As if proving his thoughts, Caleb let out a giggle as he stumbled over a word, and soon all 3 boys were laughing, their joy infectious. Even Miriam joined in, her usually reserved face lighting up with mirth. The sound wrapped around Daniel like a warm blanket, making his chest tight with feelings he couldn't quite name. I think that's enough reading for tonight, Miriam said finally, closing the Bible with care. Time to wash up for supper. The boys scattered to their tasks, still chattering and smiling. Daniel set aside his knife and gathered up the wooden horses. They were simple things, but carefully shaped, with proud necks and sturdy legs. He'd even managed to carve suggestion of manes and tails. Boys, he called gruffly, his voice uncertain. They turned to him, curious. Made you something. He held out the toys, suddenly shy about his handiwork, but his worry vanished as their faces lit up with wonder. Horses, Eli breathed, reaching out with reverent hands to take the smallest one. They're perfect, Isaac declared, examining his with appreciation for the craftsmanship. Caleb clutched his close to his chest, beaming. Thank you, Mr. Daniel. The boys settled on the floor with their new treasures, making them gallop across the wooden planks while Miriam prepared their evening meal. Daniel watched them play, his heart full in a way he'd never known before. Supper that night was a joyful affair. The wooden horses stood proud guard beside each plate, while the family shared venison stew and the last of Miriam's bread. Stories and laughter flowed as freely as the food, Isaac telling about the rabbit tracks he'd spotted, Caleb sharing an Apache legend his mother had taught him, little Eli making everyone laugh with his attempt to imitate a wolf's howl. Daniel found himself chuckling more than he had in years, perhaps more than he ever had. Each burst of laughter seemed to loosen something tight inside his chest, like spring thaw breaking winter ice. He caught Miriam's eye across the table and saw his own wonderment reflected there. This warmth, this joy, this feeling of family none of them had expected to find. Later, after the dishes were cleaned and the boys tucked into their bed of blankets near the fire, quiet settled over the cabin once more. But it was a different kind of quiet than before. Peaceful, rather than lonely. Full, rather than empty. Miriam moved about the cabin, straightening things with gentle hands while Daniel banked the fire for the night. The lamplight caught the soft wisps of hair that had escaped her cap, making them glow like copper threads. His hands stilled on the poker as he watched her, his heart suddenly pounding hard against his ribs. Miriam, he said, his voice rough with emotion. She turned to him, her face open and questioning in the dim light. The words he'd been holding back for weeks pressed against his throat, demanding to be spoken. I've never known a woman, he blurted out, his cheeks burning. Never even properly courted one. But I want you as my wife. Miriam's hands clutched her apron, her eyes wide with surprise. For a long moment, Only the crack and pop of the settling fire broke the silence. "I know I ain't much," Daniel continued, the words tumbling out now that he'd started. "Just a mountain man with rough ways. But I see how you are with the boys, how you've made this cabin a real home, and I reckon I love you for it." Tears welled in Miriam's eyes, catching the firelight like diamonds. "I never thought," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My whole life I was told I was too much, too big, too plain, too barren to be chosen." She drew a shaky breath. "But here, with you and the boys, I feel chosen at last." Daniel crossed the room in 2 long strides, though he stopped short of touching her. "Will you have me then? Will you be my wife proper before God and man?" "Yes," Miriam breathed, a tear spilling down her cheek. "Yes, I will." Without speaking, they both sank to their knees beside the fire. Daniel's large hand found Miriam's smaller one, holding it gently as they bowed their heads in prayer. "Lord," Daniel began hesitantly, unused to praying aloud, "we ask your blessing on this union. Guide us in your ways as we build this family you've given us." "Show us your path," Miriam added softly, her fingers tightening around his. "Help us to be worthy of these precious children, and of each other." They remained kneeling together, their joined hands warm between them, while the fire cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls. The sleeping children's quiet breathing mingled with the winter wind outside, a gentle reminder of the family they were becoming. When they finally rose, something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust, a strengthening of purpose. Daniel helped Miriam to her feet, his touch still shy but sure. She smiled up at him, her face glowing with joy and certainty. They sat together by the fire for a while longer, talking quietly about practical things, when to hold the wedding, how to make it official without an Amish community or mountain church nearby. But between the practical words, shy laughter and tender glances passed between them, the first tentative expressions of their growing love. The wooden horses stood sentinel on the mantel, testament to the care and creativity that had been born in this cabin. The Bible lay on the table, its pages marked with the evening's lessons, and all around them the walls that had once housed only solitude now held the warmth of family, the promise of future joy, and the sacred beginnings of a love built on respect, faith, and the miracle of finding home in unexpected places. March whispered its approach in subtle ways, longer daylight stretching across snow-covered ground, occasional drips from icicles during midday warmth, and the first brave calls of returning birds. Inside Daniel Boone's cabin, changes were just as evident, though of a different nature entirely. The once sparse dwelling had transformed. Colorful quilts, products of Miriam's patient needlework, brightened the wooden walls. Small boots lined up neatly by the door, and children's drawings decorated the rough-hewn table. The scent of fresh bread mingled with wood smoke, creating an aroma of home that seemed to wrap around everyone who entered. Early one crisp morning, Isaac and Caleb crouched beside Daniel near the creek, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Daniel's large hands moved deliberately as he demonstrated how to check the rabbit snares they'd set the day before. "See here," he whispered, pointing to tracks in the snow. "These tell you where they're running regular like. That's where you want to set your traps." Isaac nodded seriously, his 12-year-old face intent on memorizing every detail. Caleb pressed closer, 9-year-old enthusiasm barely contained as he spotted movement in one of their snares. "Look!" Caleb whispered excitedly. "We got one!" Daniel smiled, pride warming his chest as he watched Isaac show his younger brother how to properly retrieve their catch. The boys had taken to trapping with natural skill, their Apache heritage showing in their quiet movements and keen eyes. "That'll make a fine stew," Daniel said, patting both boys on their shoulders. "Your mama will be proud." The word mama fell naturally from his lips now, though it had felt strange at first. But that's what Miriam had become to these boys, a mother who loved them with her whole heart, who taught them with patience, who held them when memories of their past brought nightmares. Back at the cabin, Miriam sat in her rocking chair, humming softly while her needle flashed through fabric. 6-year-old Eli sat at her feet, carefully threading beads onto a string. The morning sun streaming through the window caught the copper highlights in his dark hair, so like his brother's. "Mama," Eli said, looking up from his work, Can you teach me that song about Jesus loving all the children?" Miriam's heart swelled at the request. "Of course, little one." She began to sing softly, her clear voice filling the cabin with the familiar hymn. Eli joined in on the chorus, his small voice sweet and pure. The door opened, letting in a blast of cold air along with Daniel and the older boys. Their cheeks were red from the morning chill, but their eyes sparkled with success as they held up 2 plump rabbits. "Look what your sons caught," Daniel announced proudly, watching Miriam's face light up. "Why, that's wonderful," she exclaimed, setting aside her quilting. "What clever trappers you're becoming." Isaac and Caleb beamed under her praise, carefully hanging their catch where it could be cleaned later. Eli abandoned his beating to examine his brother's success, asking eager questions about their morning's adventure. The day moved forward with the comfortable rhythm they'd developed over the past months. Miriam worked on her quilting while supervising the boys' reading lessons. Daniel took them out again in the afternoon, this time to practice tracking skills in the melting snow. "See these marks here?" Daniel pointed to subtle indentations. "Deer passed through not long ago. What direction were they heading?" The boys studied the signs carefully before Isaac pointed west. "That way, toward the aspen grove." "That's right." Daniel nodded, his chest tight with pride. These boys were becoming true mountaineers, learning the ways of both their Apache heritage and their new life here in the highlands. As evening approached, the family gathered inside the warm cabin. Miriam stirred a rich rabbit stew while the boys set the table, sharing stories about their day's adventures. Daniel sat in his chair by the fire, watching them all with quiet contentment. The sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors as they settled around the table for their Sunday supper. Steam rose from their bowls as Daniel reached for the Bible that now had a permanent place of honor on the mantel. "Shall we read before we eat?" he asked, his voice gruff with emotion he couldn't quite hide. The boys straightened in their chairs, faces expectant. Even little Eli folded his hands properly, though his eyes kept straying to the steaming bowl before him. Daniel opened the Bible carefully, his large fingers surprisingly gentle with the worn pages. He cleared his throat and began to read, stumbling slightly over some of the longer words but pressing on with determination. "The Lord is my shepherd," he read slowly. "I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures." As he read, Miriam quietly wiped tears from her eyes, overwhelmed by the scene before her. This giant of a man who had lived so long alone now sat reading God's word to their children. The boys listened attentively, even though they'd heard these verses before in their nightly lessons with her. After the reading, they joined hands for prayer. Daniel's huge hand engulfed Miriam's, while Eli's small fingers barely wrapped around his brother Caleb's. The circle they formed was uneven but unbroken, like their unusual family. The meal that followed was filled with conversation and laughter. Isaac told stories about the deer tracks they'd found, while Caleb added elaborate details that made everyone chuckle. Eli demonstrated how he could now write his name, using his spoon to draw letters in the air. When supper was finished and the dishes washed, the boys spread their blankets near the fire. Miriam tucked them in with gentle hands, smoothing hair and straightening covers with maternal care. Each boy received a kiss on the forehead and a whispered, "Good night, my son." Daniel watched from his chair, his heart full to bursting. These moments of tender care still amazed him. How naturally Miriam loved these children, how easily they had become a family. As the boys drifted off to sleep, their breathing growing deep and even, Daniel and Miriam sat together by the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls, now decorated with the boys' drawings and Miriam's quilts. Daniel reached over, awkwardly taking Miriam's hand in his. His touch was gentle despite his calloused fingers, treating her as something precious. "You make this place home," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Never thought I'd have this. Family, love, all of it." Miriam squeezed his hand, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd be wanted," she whispered. "My own people cast me out, said I was worthless. But here." She looked around the cabin, at the sleeping children, at their joined hands. "Here I am, wholly wanted." The fire crackled softly, its warmth matching the glow in their hearts. Outside, the wind whispered through pine boughs, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its mate. But inside the cabin, love had made its home. Hope bloomed in Miriam's heart like the first shoots of spring pushing through melting snow. Daniel's prophecy of 3 sons by spring had come true, though not in any way they could have imagined. God had led them all to this place, this moment, this family crafted from love rather than blood. They sat together in comfortable silence, their joined hands a bridge between past loneliness and present joy. The boys slept peacefully, their dreams perhaps filled with deer tracks and rabbit snares, with Bible stories and mother's songs. The cabin held them all in its warm embrace, no longer just a shelter from the mountain winter, but truly a home. The morning dawned crisp and clear, sunlight sparkling off the melting snow. Inside the cabin, Miriam hummed as she kneaded bread dough while Eli carefully practiced his letters at the table. Isaac and Caleb were outside with Daniel, learning to repair a broken trapline. The peaceful scene shattered at the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Miriam's hands stilled in the dough as she listened, her heart beginning to race. The steady rhythm grew louder, accompanied by the jingle of bridle bits and the creak of saddle leather. "Boys," she called softly, "come away from the window." Eli abandoned his letters and pressed against her skirts, his small fingers clutching the worn fabric. Through the cabin's front window, Miriam watched 2 riders emerge from the tree line. Their formal clothes and the badges glinting on their chests marked them as government men. Daniel appeared from around the woodpile, straightening to his full height as the riders approached. Isaac and Caleb ducked behind him, their dark eyes wide with fear. The first rider, a railroad agent in a crisp black coat, reined his horse to a stop. Beside him, Deputy Walter Briggs sat stern-faced upon his mount, his badge catching the morning light. "Daniel Boone?" the agent called out, his voice sharp with authority. Daniel nodded slowly, his massive frame tense. "That's right. We need to speak with you about those boys," the agent said, dismounting with a grunt. "Inside, if you please." Miriam's hands trembled as she wiped them on her apron. She gathered the children close as the men entered the cabin, their boots leaving muddy tracks on her clean floor. The agent's eyes swept the cabin's interior, taking in the neat beds, the school books on the table, the Bible on the mantel. "I am Thomas Wheeler, agent for the Western Railroad Authority. We've received word you're harboring 3 half-Apache children here." "They're our sons," Daniel said firmly, moving to stand beside Miriam and the boys. Deputy Briggs cleared his throat. "According to the law, they're wards of the government. Their mother abandoned them, making them the responsibility of the Indian Affairs Office." "We're their family now," Miriam spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt. "They belong here with us." Wheeler shook his head. "Ma'am, these boys need proper placement, either on the reservation with their mother's people or in an orphanage where they can be properly civilized." "Civilized?" Daniel's voice rumbled dangerously. "They're learning reading and scripture. They're learning honest work. What more do you want?" "What we want," Briggs said, "is to follow the law. These children must be registered and properly placed. You have no legal claim to them." Eli began to cry softly, burying his face in Miriam's skirts. Isaac stood straight-backed, his jaw set in a way that reminded her painfully of his Apache mother. Caleb's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You can't take them," Daniel growled, taking a step forward. Wheeler's hand moved to rest on his pistol. "Mr. Boone, interference with government authority is a serious offense. You're looking at jail time if you resist." "Daniel," Miriam whispered, her heart breaking at the rage and helplessness in his eyes. "You have until tomorrow morning," Briggs announced. "We'll return with a wagon to collect the boys. Any resistance will result in your arrest and prosecution." The men turned to leave, their boots heavy on the wooden floor. At the door, Briggs paused. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but the law is the law." The sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, leaving the cabin in crushing silence. Eli's sobs grew louder, and Caleb joined him, tears streaming down his face. Isaac remained rigid, but his lower lip trembled. "They can't take us," Isaac whispered. "Please don't let them take us." Miriam gathered all 3 boys into her arms, her own tears falling into their dark hair. "Hush now," she soothed, though her voice shook. "Hush, my sons." Daniel paced the cabin like a caged bear, his hands clenching and unclenching. Suddenly, He strode to the corner where his rifle stood. The wooden stock gleamed in the sunlight as he lifted it. "No!" Miriam cried out, releasing the boys to grab Daniel's arm. "Not with guns, please!" His massive frame trembled under her touch. "Then how?" he demanded, anguish rough in his voice. "How do we keep our family together?" "There must be another way," Miriam pleaded. "Violence will only make things worse. They'll take you to jail, and then what becomes of us?" Daniel's shoulders slumped. Slowly, he lowered the rifle back to its corner. The boys watched with wide, frightened eyes as their father sank into his chair by the cold hearth. The rest of the day passed in a haze of grief and fear. The boys refused to leave Miriam's side, clinging to her skirts as she moved through the cabin's familiar tasks. But there was no joy in the work now. Even little Eli's usual chatter was silenced. Night fell early, as it still did in the late mountain winter. Miriam tried to lead the evening prayers, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she speak of God's providence when their family was about to be torn apart? "I don't want to go to the orphanage," Caleb whispered in the darkness. "They'll separate us. They always separate brothers." "I won't let them," Isaac declared fiercely. "I promised Ma I'd keep us together." "I want to stay with Mama Miriam," Eli whimpered. "Please don't make us go." Daniel sat in his chair, silent and brooding, as Miriam tried to comfort the boys. She sang hymns softly, stroked their hair, and promised again and again that she loved them. But she couldn't promise they would stay together. The law stood between them like an iron wall. The cabin that had been so full of joy now felt heavy with sorrow. Outside, an owl called mournfully, and the wind whispered through the pines. Inside, 3 little boys cried themselves to sleep in their mother's arms while their father kept his vigil by the dying fire, his heart torn between rage and despair. Miriam looked at Daniel across the sleeping children, seeing the helpless anger in the set of his shoulders, the way his huge hands gripped the arms of his chair. This giant of a man, who had promised her 3 sons by spring, who had opened his heart and home to create a family from love rather than blood, now sat defeated by men with badges and papers. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the cabin walls. Tomorrow, the wagon would come. Tomorrow, their family would be broken. Tomorrow, the joy they had found in this mountain home would end. Daniel's rifle stood silent in its corner, a temptation he had resisted for love of his family. But what good was laying down arms if it meant losing everything? Miriam held her sleeping sons closer, her tears falling silently in the darkness. The night stretched endless before them, each moment precious, each hour bringing them closer to the morning they dreaded. The cabin was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft breathing of sleeping children and the occasional pop of the dying fire. Outside, the mountain night wrapped around them, offering no answers, no escape from the law that threatened to destroy their family. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-dusted pines in shades of rose and gold. Inside the cabin, no one had slept well. Miriam stood at the wood stove, mechanically stirring a pot of morning porridge that no one would want to eat. The boys huddled together on their shared pallet, whispering in voices too soft to hear. Daniel paced by the window, his heavy boots wearing a path in the floorboards. Every few minutes he would pause, peer out at the trail, then resume his restless walking. His massive shoulders were tight with tension, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "We could leave now," he said suddenly, turning to Miriam. "Pack what we can carry and head deeper into the mountains. I know places where they'd never find us." Miriam set down her wooden spoon, studying the man who had become so dear to her. "And live as fugitives?" she asked softly. "Always looking over our shoulders, teaching our sons to hide in fear? Better than losing them," Daniel growled, though his voice cracked on the last word. Isaac lifted his head from the pallet. "I can ride, Pa. We could go with you into the hills." "No," Miriam said firmly. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to where Daniel stood. Though he towered over her, she met his gaze steadily. "Running would only brand us criminals. They'd hunt us down, and then what? You in jail, the boys taken anyway, and me?" She swallowed hard. "Me alone again." Daniel's face softened as he looked down at her. "I can't just stand by and watch them take our family apart." "Then we fight," Miriam said, squaring her shoulders. Not with guns or running, but with truth and faith. How? Daniel's voice was heavy with doubt. We go to town. We speak before everyone. The townsfolk, the sheriff, whoever will listen. Make them see we're a real family, not just names on some government paper. Daniel shook his head. My voice won't sway them. I'm just a mountain man. They already look at me like I'm half wild. Then I'll speak. Miriam's voice grew stronger with each word. I know what it means to be cast out, to be told you don't belong. I'll make them understand. Little Eli scrambled up from the pallet and ran to clutch at her skirts. You promised you wouldn't leave us, Mama, he whispered. Miriam knelt down, gathering him close. And I mean to keep that promise, my love. She looked up at his brothers. All of you, come here. Caleb and Isaac joined them, pressing close as they had that first night when Daniel brought them in from the cold. Miriam held them tight, breathing in the scent of their hair, feeling their small hearts beating against her. Listen to me, she said. You are our sons, not by birth but by love and by God's own hand. He brought us together, and I believe with all my heart he means us to stay together. But the law, Daniel started. The law is made by men, Miriam interrupted, and men can be moved by truth and mercy. We've done nothing wrong in loving these children, in giving them a home and teaching them faith. She stood, keeping one arm around Eli while reaching for Daniel's hand with the other. Remember what you told me that first morning? If God wills, he'll send sons, by blood or by providence. Well, he did send them. And I won't believe he meant it only for a season. Daniel's fingers tightened around hers. You really think they'll listen? To us? They'll listen, Miriam said with quiet certainty. Because I'll speak from my heart, as a mother who knows what it means to be judged unworthy. I'll tell them how these boys have brought life and joy to our home, how they're learning scripture and honest work, how they pray each night and help their neighbors and love their new family with all their hearts. Caleb pressed closer to her side. Will you tell them about the quilts we made for Widow Jensen, and how Isaac helped Mr. Roberts fix his fence? I'll tell them everything, Miriam promised. Every good thing, every proof that we're a true family. The morning light strengthened, filling the cabin with golden warmth. Outside, birds began their morning songs, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. We should eat, Miriam said practically, then wash and dress in our Sunday best. We'll meet them with dignity. As she served the porridge, her hands were steady. The boys ate quietly, watching her with trust in their eyes. Daniel managed only a few bites before pushing his bowl away and returning to his vigil at the window. They dressed carefully, the boys in their cleanest shirts, hair slicked down with water. Miriam put on her best dress, the dark blue one she'd worn to meeting in her old life. Daniel donned his one good shirt, though it strained across his shoulders. The morning passed with agonizing slowness. They tried to keep to their normal routine. The boys did their lessons. Daniel checked his traps. Miriam kneaded bread. But every sound from the trail made them freeze. Every shadow passing the window caused their hearts to race. As evening approached, Daniel called them together. We should pray, he said gruffly. Ask for guidance, for strength. They knelt together on the rough wooden floor, hands clasped. Daniel tried to begin, but the words wouldn't come. His broad shoulders began to shake. Our Father, Miriam's voice took up the prayer. We come before you as a family, bound not by blood, but by love. The love you taught us, the love that makes all your children one. A sob escaped Daniel's throat. He can't take them, he whispered brokenly. God can't take away what he just gave us. Miriam reached out, gently lifting his chin until their eyes met. Tears streaked his weathered cheeks, but she smiled through her own. Faith means he won't, she said softly. Faith means believing that love is stronger than fear, that truth will overcome prejudice, that family is more than names on paper. The boys pressed closer, their small hands reaching out to touch their father's shoulders, their mother's skirts. In the failing light, they knelt together, their shadows merging on the cabin wall. Whatever comes tomorrow, Miriam continued praying, her voice steady and clear. We face it together, not with weapons or running, but with truth and love and faith. Give us the words to speak, Lord. Give us the courage to stand, and help those who would separate us to see with your eyes, to understand with your heart." "Amen," whispered the boys. "Amen," Daniel echoed, his voice rough with tears but growing stronger. The cabin grew dark around them, but they remained kneeling together, drawing strength from each other's presence. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they were still a family, bound by love and faith and the quiet courage of a woman who had once been cast out but now stood ready to fight for her children with the strongest weapons she knew: truth and love. Dawn painted the Colorado mountains in shades of pink and gold as Daniel hitched the horses to their wagon. His hands trembled slightly as he checked the harnesses one final time. Behind him, Miriam helped the boys into their cleanest clothes, smoothing hair and straightening collars with gentle touches that spoke of a mother's love. "Remember what we practiced," she whispered, adjusting Isaac's shirt. "Stand tall, speak clear and truthful." The morning air bit cold as they loaded into the wagon. Daniel lifted Miriam up carefully, then helped each boy aboard. Little Eli clung to his mother's skirts while Caleb and Isaac sat straight-backed, trying to look brave despite their fear. The wagon creaked as Daniel took his place at the reins. They rode in silence, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of hooves and the occasional snuffle from the boys. Miriam kept one arm around Eli, her other hand clasped tight with Caleb's. Her plain blue dress marked her Amish heritage, though she'd left that life behind. Today, it served as armor of sorts, a reminder of faith and perseverance. The town appeared through the morning mist, first the church steeple, then the other buildings taking shape. Already people gathered in the street, word having spread about the Mountain family and their fight to keep their children. Daniel's jaw tightened as he guided the wagon down the main street. Whispers followed their progress. Women paused in their morning errands, men stepped out of shops to watch. Miriam felt their stares like physical things, some curious, some hostile, some pitying. She lifted her chin higher, remembering times past when similar looks had driven her to shame and hiding. Not today. Today, she had something worth fighting for. They stopped before the courthouse where Deputy Briggs waited with the railroad agent and several other officials. The preacher stood nearby, his expression troubled as he watched them descend from the wagon. Daniel helped Miriam down first, then lifted each boy to the ground. They stood together, a family forged not by blood, but by love and circumstance. "Mrs. Yoder," Deputy Briggs began. "Mrs. Boone," Daniel corrected firmly, his deep voice carrying across the gathering crowd. "She's to be my wife." More whispers rippled through the onlookers. Miriam squeezed Daniel's hand, drawing strength from his steadfast presence. The railroad agent stepped forward, papers clutched in his hand. "These children are wards of the government," he declared. "Their mother abandoned them, and their father's death leaves them under territorial jurisdiction. They must be returned to proper authorities." "We are their proper authorities," Daniel growled, but Miriam touched his arm gently. "Let me speak," she whispered. He nodded, stepping back slightly but keeping close. Miriam moved forward, and though her heart pounded, her voice came clear and strong. "Friends and neighbors," she began, looking out at the gathered faces. "Some of you know me. Some of you have judged me." Her gaze swept past several women who had sneered at her in the general store. "I was cast out by my own people, called useless, barren, unwanted." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The preacher's wife dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "2 months ago I sat dying in the snow believing God had abandoned me." Miriam's voice carried emotion but remained steady. "Then Daniel Boone found me. This quiet mountain man who'd never courted any woman looked at me and spoke the strangest words I'd ever heard. He said that by spring I would birth him 3 sons. A few chuckles sounded from the crowd, quickly hushed. Miriam smiled slightly. "I thought him mad. What man would want a cast-off woman too heavy, too plain, declared barren by all who knew her? But Daniel saw something others missed. He saw how God works in ways we cannot understand." She reached back, drawing the boys forward. They came willingly, pressing close to her skirts as they had that first night in the cabin. "Look," her voice rang out stronger. "God did give us 3 sons, not by birth, but by his providence. 3 beautiful boys, hungry and abandoned, placed in our path by his own hand. We fed them, clothed them, taught them scripture and honest work." Tears glimmered in her eyes but didn't fall. Isaac helps his father with the traps and teaches his brothers to read. Caleb splits kindling and helps me bake bread for Widow Jensen. Little Eli says his prayers every night and thanks God for his new family. The preacher stepped forward, his face working with emotion. The law has certain requirements. The law is made by men, Miriam interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. But family is made by God. These children need love, guidance, and a home where they're wanted. Not just for a season, but forever. She turned to face the railroad agent directly. Your papers say they're half Apache, that they belong on the reservation. But they belong with us. Daniel teaches them to hunt and trap, to survive in these mountains as he has. I teach them faith and letters, cooking and craft. They learn to help neighbors, to pray, to trust that love won't abandon them. Little Eli pressed closer to her side. Please don't take us away, he whispered, loud enough to carry in the sudden silence. Mama promised she wouldn't leave us. Miriam knelt down, gathering him close. And I mean to keep that promise, she said firmly, looking up at the officials. These are our sons, not by blood, but by love and by God's own choosing. He brought them to us through snow and darkness, and he meant them to stay. The crowd had grown larger, more townspeople gathering to witness the scene. The preacher's wife was openly crying now, and several other women wiped at their eyes. The men shifted uncomfortably, some nodding slowly as they watched the family stand together. I've seen them at work, a voice called out. It was Mr. Roberts, the farmer whose fence Isaac had helped mend. Good boys, all three. Mind their manners and work hard. They brought soup when my Thomas was sick, Widow Jensen added. The little one sang hymns to cheer him up. More voices joined in, sharing small kindnesses observed, moments that proved the family's worth. The railroad agent looked increasingly uncomfortable, shuffling his papers. Deputy Briggs cleared his throat. The law does make provisions, in cases where the children's welfare is clearly served. Miriam stood, drawing herself up to her full height. Though she carried more weight than fashion approved, in that moment she appeared almost regal in her simple dignity. 2 months ago, a man spoke words that seemed foolish. He said God would give us sons. Look how that prophecy stands fulfilled. Not as we expected, but exactly as we needed. Her voice carried clear and strong across the square. We ask only to keep what God has given us, to raise these boys in faith and love, to make them men their two peoples can be proud of. She reached for Daniel's hand and he stepped forward to stand beside her. The boys clustered close, and together they faced the officials and townsfolk. The morning sun broke fully through the clouds, bathing them in golden light. The preacher moved forward, tears glistening on his weathered cheeks. The crowd fell silent, waiting for his words. Miriam held her breath, feeling Daniel's hand tighten around hers, feeling the boys press closer to her skirts. Everything they had built together hung on this moment. Their family, their future, their faith that love could overcome any boundary. Deputy Briggs shifted his weight from one boot to the other, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as townsfolk pressed closer, their voices rising in support. "Those children belong with their mama," Mrs. Jensen called out firmly. Others nodded in agreement, and more voices joined the chorus. The preacher stepped forward, his Bible clutched in weathered hands. "Let us make this right before God and man," he declared. He turned to Daniel and Miriam, raising his hands in blessing. "By the authority vested in me, I bless this union." His words rang clear across the square as he laid gentle hands on each boy's dark hair. "Lord, keep this family together, bound by your love, if not by blood." The railroad agent's face reddened with fury, but he found himself alone. One by one, townspeople stepped forward, forming a protective circle around the family. Even Deputy Briggs tucked his papers away, nodding slowly. "Seems to me," he said quietly, "these boys are exactly where they ought to be." Daniel's large hand engulfed Miriam's and tears spilled freely down both their cheeks. Isaac, Caleb, and little Eli pressed close, their smiles bright with joy and relief. In that moment, Daniel's wild winter prophecy stood fulfilled in ways none could have imagined. Back at the mountain cabin, relief flooded every corner like warm sunlight. The familiar scent of fresh-baked bread mingled with bubbling rabbit stew, filling the home with comfort. Miriam's hands worked steadily at the hearth, her heart light for the first time in memory. We're staying. We're staying. Little Eli danced around the cabin, his brothers joining in with whoops of joy. Their footsteps thundered across the wooden floors as they celebrated, faces glowing with happiness. Near the crackling fire, Daniel stood close to Miriam. His large frame trembled slightly as he leaned down, pressing a gentle, hesitant kiss to her lips. They both pulled back, nervous laughter bubbling up between them. The boys giggled and covered their eyes. Later, as darkness settled over the mountains, Daniel and Miriam tucked the exhausted children into their beds. Quilts were pulled up to chins, prayers whispered softly. "God has answered my lonely years with more than I dreamed," Daniel murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Miriam's eyes grew moist as she squeezed his hand. "And I have found grace where I thought there was none, and a family where I feared I'd never belong." They settled by the dying fire, its soft glow wrapping around them like a blessing, as sleep came easily at last. Spring crept into the Colorado highlands like a gentle awakening. Melting snow fed the creeks until they rushed and tumbled, their song filling the valley. Tender green shoots pushed through the dark earth, and wild purple iris dotted the meadows like scattered gems. Daniel and Miriam walked together along a worn path, their fingers intertwined. Ahead of them, their 3 sons darted through the tall grass, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Isaac led the charge, his longer legs taking him farther, while Caleb and little Eli chased after him, their faces bright with joy. Daniel watched them, his heart full. The sight of his boys racing through golden sunlight seemed impossible, a dream made real. He drew Miriam closer, wrapping his strong arm around her shoulders. His voice was soft as he repeated the words that had started it all. "By spring, you'll birth me 3 sons." Miriam's eyes welled with tears of joy. "And by God's mercy you have," she whispered back. Together, the family knelt on the hilltop's sweet grass. Their prayers rose up, giving thanks for redemption, for love freely chosen, and for the miracle of their found family. Above them, the vast western sky stretched endless and blue, filled with the sound of their sons' laughter. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.